Calling all card fighters. We welcome you to the Dojo, a Card Fighters podcast.
I kind of like that opening. It's not that bad. What do you think?
I think there's some work that can be done.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What's up, guys? My name is Naru Samurai. You guys know me. I've been kind of gone for a bit, but now I'm back with a pretty nice podcast setup, I got to be honest. To the people watching right now live on Twitch, looks pretty nice. To those in the audio, you got to check it out. You got to go on Twitch and see it. So, like I said, my name is Naru Samurai. This is my one good friend, Anderson Williams. You guys may have seen him in Way of the Card Fighter back on YouTube, which is a series that I need to continue, right?
I think so.
I know. But we're finally here to talk about some Vanguard, our do's, our don'ts, our meta-analysis, and a little bit about cards of the day, because I think in the last 2 weeks there was an insane amount of cards that were revealed.
Yeah, we're getting the collab set stuff coming out for Shaman King and Records of Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. For the most part, though, those cards we're not going to see any impact on the meta. Maybe some of the Yo Asakura stuff for Shaman King. From what we've seen in Japan, Yo Asakura has actually been a fairly popular deck. And so maybe this new support that's coming out will help him along. We haven't actually seen that much for the Yo deck outside of the new Grade 3. But that new Grade 3 actually I feel is pretty good. But today we're not going to really discuss the collab set reveals. We're going to be discussing the two new recent additions to Orphist and Zorga in the form of the new Orphist and Zorga. And then from there, I think we're going to be launching into a bit of a standard meta-analysis, and then we'll be doing a review of the new premium cards.
I'm excited for that.
Those are some good cards coming out there. And then after we get that taken care of, we're probably going to launch into another meta-analysis going over what we think premiums going for right now. Because what we've seen, especially on Vanguardians, recently, there's actually been some discussion on Order Colony and what it might mean for the meta going forward.
Yeah, I saw a little bit about that coming home today from work, and I got to be honest, Order Colony is not something I'm really worried about, honestly.
No, but I think that plays more into the decks that you and I use. But once we get to that point, I think we'll start going over that a bit more. But I think we're going to start off with actually today's stream reveal for standard, Cardinal Dominus, Orphist Regis. This card, to me, is such a good addition for the Orphist deck. On play, on Vanguard Circle, choose a world order in your discard or in your hand and play it. So it bypasses your once per turn order, as it's not counted as your order for turn.
So you can get to 3 because you're obviously going to play an order earlier.
Yes. You actually want to play multiple orders throughout the turns with this guy, and rewriting him adds into that. But we'll get into that here in a bit. But we'll focus on this first effect here. It ignores costs, which is important because if you run this Orphist in the ride line, you're giving up the original Orphist ability to counterblast to make 3 tokens, which when we go into the second part of this card's effect is fairly important because he doesn't generate as many tokens on your first turn. What he does instead is he's a slow build towards what normal Orphist does, but he will eventually overtake what Orphist does if you build the deck to do that.
So before we actually get into the second skill, and a lot of people probably already heard it, but we're going to reiterate it. Do you really think it replaces the Orphist in the ride line?
Yes, because original Orphist, the issue with him is that he is counterblast 2 for a +1. He makes 3 tokens. Mm-hmm. But the issue with that is he does not have any aggro from there. You make your 3 tokens, and you are relying on the grade 2 out of set 3 to sit there and get more aggro out of your cards, but that card required you to sacrifice 3 tokens, so it essentially equated to Counterblast 2, this card attacks twice.
Yes.
And then I believe it had a 5k power buff if you were an Abyssal Dark Knight. But wrapping back over to Orphist Regis's first effect, it ignores cost. So that means the order that says every time you play a Shadow Army token, that token gets +5. I think that's a Soul Blast 2 cost, if I remember correctly. That you can now discard for ride into Regis, play it for free, and now we'll go ahead and get into Regis's second effect, which is, I believe, at the end of the battle, Counterblast 1, discard a card. For every 2, as long as you're an Abyssal Dark Knight, for every 2 of your world orders, you generate a Shadow Army token. So this now gives the deck the ability to perform a maximum of 5 attacks in a turn, but technically more because of that grade 2 triple rare from set 3. If you can actually pull it up real quick, that grade 2 from set 3, because I don't remember if it's a once per turn effect. If it's not, Orphis gets a very large amount of multi-attacks. So actually, I believe I'll pull it up here real quick to make sure.
No worries. But yeah, I do think that Orphis does have a big change in the meta. I was looking on Twitter, on Vanguardians. A lot of people are excited. A lot more are excited about it than the Zorga players and their new grade 3 Zorga. Speaking about Zorga and Orphis, they're not grade 4s.
They are not. They're still grade 3s, still have Twin Drive. Most importantly for the Orphis card, however, it does still have Persona Ride, which is really going to help with the multi-attacking that this deck's about to get off.
Yes. And I do think like another part that kind of catches my eye is the Persona Ride. Like Zorga and Orphis like were begging for the Persona Ride. Like you needed it.
Yes.
For the most part. Some were upset that they didn't get a grade 4, but in all honesty, would they have done better as a grade 4?
Zorga might have, but Zorga, when we get into Zorga, we'll get into that more, but Zorga's suffering from 3 attack syndrome, and that throughout a turn, it only gets those 3 attacks. It doesn't have multi-attacking, and its aggro is limited to how high of a power ceiling it can hit and how many crits it can check. But we'll get into that when we get into the Zorga. But I do have Cardinal Draco, Destigade, the grade 2 from set 3.
The restander.
Yes. So if you're in Dark Knight, it gets +2. If you're in Abyssal Dark Knight, it instead gets +5. But the restand effect is not a once per turn. It is just simply at the end of the battle that this attacked, sack 3 tokens, stand this unit.
So how would you do it more than once?
So you would swing with 1 column.
Yes.
That column probably has a Shadow Army token.
Okay, I get you. All right.
The Orphist has a Shadow Army token, and Destigade has a Shadow Army token. Mm-hmm. You swing with Destigade, trigger the effect, sack off the 3 tokens, it restands. You now swing with Regis,
yes.
Which, if you have 6 orders in your order zone, you'll then, at the end of the battle, make 3 tokens again, pass any trigger effects that you get off onto Destigade. You'll swing with the other column that now has a new Shadow Army token in it. You'll swing with Destigade, sack off the 3 tokens, restand the Destigade, swing with it again. So the deck just got way more attacks than it had before.
And both are being, 2 of them are being boosted by a Shadow Army token.
Correct. And the very last one is hopefully being boosted by trigger effects. And the fact that this is a Brant Gate deck now means that if you get that over trigger, your opponent's more than likely gonna not guard Orphist because he has no inherent pressure behind him. They're just only worrying about the trigger checks. So if your opponent's like at 2 damage, they're just gonna take the Orphist swing, so that way they don't have to deal with guarding it. But if you check that over trigger, you can give everything to the Destigade, and it's now 200 million plus whatever, and your opponent has to PG it 2 times.
That's not fun.
It's not. And then it's going to have, of course, the 2 crit because of the Brant Gate over trigger having the effect that it does. I also feel that this new Orphist makes Thumberino a much better card. Because in the event that you can't build up 2 Destrage sack 3 cost, because without original Orphist, that cost becomes a bit harder to comply. But the new Orphist works very well with Thumberino's ability to sack off the token and then draw a card. Normally that was about a -1 for you because you would get more power. You'd be able to hit your opponent if they guarded it. They guarded it. If they didn't, you would sack 2 cards and only draw 1. Now you can sack the 2 cards, and when you swing with Orphist, you can make a new Shadow Army token without worrying about calling over another card. So you're not losing any advantage. You're not losing a card. You're making up for it by making a new token.
So are we saying that Orphist is back in?
I'm saying that Orphist is definitely a possibility. It won't replace the same spot that Gravidia is in at the moment, because Gravidia has that really good grade 2 turn. Now the Gravidia grade 2 turn is helped by the Orphist cards. Of course, Eclipse, Moonlight, Counterblast 1 on play, make a Shadow Army token, and Cardinal Noid Cubigia. Is that the grade 2? Cubigia?
The one that got revealed?
No, the ride line grade 2.
I think so. I mean,
it's
see the skill.
Yeah, it's Fovi, Rotis, and Cubigia, and then Orphist. So yeah, the grade 2 Cubigia is also innately a part of the Orphist ride line. So actually, I think I'm going to change that slightly. This deck may begin to take up the slot that Gravidia was doing. Gravidia had the really good crit pressure, but it always, of course, gets stopped by a PG. Now Orphist has really good multi-attack pressure with really good power columns because of how big Shadow Army tokens are. And because the fact this deck still gets Persona Ride, those Shadow Army tokens at a base, if you're putting them in the front row, are 25Ks.
Mm-hmm. I think we went a little bit more into Brancade there for a bit. But overall, I do think Orphist has generated a lot more pressure that it usually gets. And honestly, it's a bit of a change because we've been getting Prison for a good chunk of time. Gravidia just came in and knocked out the OG Orphist out for a bit. Mm-hmm. I think he deserves his return to the limelight.
Yep, and with the anime coming up for season 3, Zakuza is confirmed to be in the same tournament bracket as Yu Yu. Mm-hmm. So we may see Zakuza fight off against Yu Yu, and Yu Yu using his new, hopefully Nirvana cards. There's some rumors apparently floating around that he may be switching away from Nirvana. We'll see if that happens. I'm very much so a Nirvana player.
He's going to be playing Eugene.
I hope not. Eugene needs some work, probably in the same vein as what Orphist got.
That's fair.
Because Eugene very much so suffers from 3 attack syndrome, which in the current version of the meta, only 3 attacks is so easy to deal with because you just have to block those 3 attacks. You can take one of them, guard one, take the last one. You've taken 2 damage. You don't have to sit there and worry about, oh, well, I have to sit there and take attack over here. Then I have to sit there and worry about the Vanguard attack. Then I have to worry about the next wave of attacks that are about to come through. I can just take one attack, guard the Vanguard attack, and then if I need to guard the last attack, I can. But now these decks are moving past that 3 attack syndrome and getting to a better place where they need to go in terms of the meta.
I agree. I'm thinking about Zorga right now.
Zorga. So Grave equals Zorga.
Grave equals Zorga. So I actually went into a debate with someone, and I know what the correct answer is. But I do think I need to mention it. So I was at my locals, and someone was talking to me about, well, I'm kind of disappointed that Zorga is Grave equals Zorga because there's a good chunk of cards that require Zorga's name, right? And no part of his skill says that he's
Original Zorga.
Which is kind of funny because Figra says she says you can keep Persona writing over her. as if she was the original.
Agree, yeah.
Yes. And I do think that I really don't think he needs it, right? But the person at the shop was adamant that because it says equals, it shares the same name as Zorga. I'm like, that's not how card names work.
I'm not certain who that was at our locals, but no, I can definitely confirm that in no card game does the equal sign mean that it is the exact same name. But I guess we'll get into the more important part of this portion of the discussion, and that is...
Yeah, you need a little bit of culture in there, okay?
Just a little bit.
Just a tiny bit.
Just that nice little sprinkle. So moving into Zorga's effect, his first effect is Continuous Vanguard Circle. If you've performed Alchemagic this turn, your front row gets +5.
Yes.
So this is partially to make up for the loss of that order that our person at locals was discussing, Grief, Despair, and Rejection. Grief, Despair, and Rejection says you can only play this if your Vanguard is Spiritual Body, Mysterious Reign Spiritualist, Zorga. The new Zorga, of course, not having the same name. You can't use this order, but the rest of the Grief, Despair, and Rejection was Counterblast 1. Your front row gets +10. So you would sit there and stack that on top of Persona Ride, and you would get a +20k, or your front column or front row would get +20. And this is Zorga's essentially bread and butter was the huge power columns that they got by comboing Persona Ride and Grief, Despair, and Rejection. Now that you're not able to do this, Zorga has Grief, Despair, a miniature Grief, Despair, and Rejection built into his effects. But that 5K, the difference between 5K and 10K is a lot. At 5K just means that, of course, I only have to guard with a 10K before boosters. And a lot of decks at this point are running the new 10K Shield Great draw triggers. So it makes those attacks a lot easier to deal with. If those draw triggers weren't out, I feel like it would actually be a fairly decent ability, because when your opponent would go to guard, if the Zorga player had no boosters, they could sit there and swing like 18. And now the opponent has to sit there and go, well, in order to guard this, I have to drop 2 cards.
So you brought up the draw triggers for a second.
Yes.
What do you think about the heal triggers?
The new heal triggers are fairly situational.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. They feel, and here you need to hear me fully out on this, because there's an difference between these heal triggers and what I'm about to say.
Okay.
They followed the original logic of the imaginary gifts. And I don't mean the whole that they gain all these powers and all that. No, the whole rock, paper, scissors mantra of it. Because you know they're meant for the deck that they can't win against, or they have a small win rate against.
Yeah.
So this is where I kind of take into account what Overdress is trying to do. But let's also remember what the business topic or the business sale of Overdress was. It is for a game that people can easily get into, which kind of contradicts itself when you release a starter deck to tell you how to play the game.
I mean, we'll get into that here in a bit. I'll touch on it briefly. Those starter decks are because we're going to be 6 sets into the game. And if somebody wants to get into the game now, they're going to sit there and go, well, I've missed out on these 5 sets. And these now going to be 2 collaboration sets, because we're getting the Records of Ragnarok set, and we're getting a mega set for Shaman King. We're getting both Shaman King sets. And then, of course, there's the Token Rambu trial deck and booster that we got, and then the now 2 lyrical sets and the trial deck for them. So if a person sits there and comes into the game, they're like, I've missed all of these sets, and it doesn't really feel like these new trial decks are a good jumping on point. It helps transition them in better by having these new trial decks, having the cards, explain some of the actions on it, so that way you can sit down, open up the box, and your friend who already knows how to play the game can sit there and go, I'm going to teach you the more in-depth parts, but your cards are very literally going to show you what to do.
Yes. And we'll really quickly get back into Zorga for a second, but I do want to touch on one thing about these sets. We are about to be 5 sets in. Well, they're already 5 sets in
Japan.
In Japan, okay? And this is just Overdress alone. We have not gotten reprints past triggers, basic triggers.
Correct.
Have you seen those over triggers?
Yes. Drag Veda, the Dragon Empire overtrigger,
Yes.
has very much so become the now poster child of these cards need reprints.
I love the word poster child. Makes me feel good inside.
Because it is $31 or $31.99 for the overtrigger.
It was 45 2 days ago.
Oh, it has gone up since the last time I have looked at it.
But it's back to 30.
Possibly. If you could look it up real quick.
Yeah, sure.
So that way we can make sure of that. But the overtriggers are definitely something that need to see a reprint for the most part. Hopefully those 3 new trial decks, because we're not getting starter decks this time around. We're getting 3 new trial decks. I keep wanting to say structure deck. But those 3 new trial decks more than likely aren't going to have the more complicated overtrigger. If they do, it would actually be fairly interesting because those trial decks are meant to transition newer players into a more advanced sense of the card game. But I think it's probably just going to be another instance of the vanilla overtrigger.
I think the biggest question people are going to wonder, and I'm going to laugh if this is the case, can you use those cards in an actual deck?
Yes, that would be very interesting.
And they become expensive for being like this funny mantra of having cards that have abilities.
I mean,
or have abilities that tell you how to use the card.
There were the teaching decks for the beginning of V, and those actually ran a fairly decent price. Even though some of them weren't played, I think for a small period. I think one of the Kagero cards was played. But the starters and the force markers that came out of those teaching decks actually ran a fairly good price.
So I pulled up some of the overtriggers.
Okay.
So we're looking past the SPs.
Yes.
The first most expensive overtrigger at $24. So they're going down. I lied. Most expensive overtrigger at $31.58 is Dragon Deity, King of Resurgence. Drag Veda.
So the Dragon Empire overtrigger, of course, being one of the most expensive in the overdressed format. Of course, Dragon Empire is the main character's deck. So for a certain extent, that is going to be a fairly popular deck for more casual people to play. In the meta, Nirvana is not as high. I would still say it does fairly well. I'm actually personally a Nirvana main myself, but I can sit there and say comfortably that like you can run into every deck besides Prison and Magnolia, and you're for the most part going to have an okay time. Even if like, you know, going second against Bruce, going second against Bastion, those are of course hard times, but if you're able to build up resources correctly, you're going to be able to live past those initial rush turns, and you'll be able to live from there. Magnolia and Seraph are a bit harder, of course, because Magnolia just consistently gets those 6 attacks every single turn, has really good draw power, has the ability to even recur cards, and has untargetable cards and good power lines. Just overall, Magnolia is a really good deck. And then
It's the best deck. It's honestly the best deck.
In the format right now, yeah.
It's, guys, I don't like Great Nature. And I think some people are really good at Great Nature. But Magnolia is great. And I play Magnolia. And Magnolia's not Great Nature, but it's Great Nature. And I even play the deck.
You do. You have actually gotten first at our locals fairly consistently with that deck. But recently you actually lost.
Yeah.
You actually didn't get first place, and it was to a Bastion player.
Yes, I lost to what was it Apex Ruler? Not Apex Ruler. Prime.
Apex surpassing sword, Bastion Prime.
These names are just getting longer.
That's Vanguard for you.
Yep. Yeah. You know what? I dig my own grave on that one.
Yep.
But yeah, Bastion got me.
Yep.
Honestly, that matchup is not fun. It's like 50-50.
Yeah. Bastion is doing a similar thing to what Magnolia does. It's just that its lines are bigger.
Yeah.
So it's usually like, it's probably 20 on the first swing. Bastion can swing anywhere from 15 to 30, depending on whether or not you're using boosters. And then the final line is usually another 15 to 30, but that restand line is where it starts to get big. Because Bastion, of course, gives it that 10K. You're probably using Alden, who gives himself 5K both times. I do know that over in Japan, they're actually starting to drop Alden altogether, and they're just moving towards Lagriel if they need it. But they're moving more towards just generic grade 3 good stuff that doesn't take up a bunch of counterblast. So that way they're not having to worry about resource management. They're just worrying about, did I get my Bastions? Okay, I can go ahead and start jamming in.
So we're coming in talking about the grade 4s again. And we're getting that festival collection with Orphis, Zorga. We're most likely ending up going to get maybe a Eugene. I doubt it. And
No, the festival collection is specifically players from Blackout,
Okay.
and Daybreak. So
Exor?
we might. There's actually a joke from Kadani Baron, or Baron Kadani, his CEO Kadani's nickname. There's a joke from him stating that they might do Hexaorb support. We've yet to see anything. We last night got the first Keter Sanctuary reveal, and it was a grade 3 Persona Ride 13K base. If its attack hits, counterblast 1, choose one of your grade 3 or greater units, and it gets plus 10K. Not great. This festival collection is kind of like last year's festival collection.
Shiny and one-ofs.
Shiny and one-ofs. And cards that are probably going to come out of the deck the moment the deck gets new support.
Set 7.
Set 6. We're getting set 6.
We're skipping set 6.
I hope not. But the cards coming out of that are really interesting. Like, we actually have to finish up with Zorga real quick.
Yep.
Zorga's second effect, which is a fairly big departure from original Zorga, is Soul Blast 1, discard a card. Choose a normal order in your drop zone, add it to your hand, and the next time you play a normal order, you can Alchemagic. What this does inherent to the original Zorga is because now you can recur the orders that you want out of your drop zone, you can play a bunch of one-of orders, so that way whatever situation you're in, you can grab that back and then play it. Normal Zorga can do that, but it wants to go for a more consistent route on its orders and what it can see. Because, of course, if an order is a one-of and it gets damaged and sent to the drop, it gets to Alchemagic with it one time, and that's it. Unless it plays the Sleeve Tugging Belt to then recur those bound orders. Yeah.
Sleeve Tugging Belt.
Naru Samurai himself wants to play against Grand Blue like a normal person, but instead they play a one-of that they can tutor automatically and just completely blow out Narukami with.
Sleeve Tugging Belt. If anyone's talking about things that need to be banned.
We'll get into that when we get to the premium section because I actually have some thoughts on that card.
Time.
But we'll get into the comparisons between this Zorga and the original Zorga, because you can't really compare old Orphis to new Orphis because the cards are inherently designed to do different things. New Orphis is designed to do multi-attacking. Old Orphis was just designed to make those 3 tokens beat your opponent's face. The 2 new Zorgas have 2 different styles of deck building altogether. Old Zorga is you want to play consistency. You want to play your orders in multiple numbers. and you're going to sit there and you're probably just trying to grind out your opponent with old Zorga.
Yes.
New Zorga wants to do the same thing, but it doesn't have to be as consistent about its deck building because it can now run less orders. And orders as one-ofs. It does mean, however, the grade 2 triple rare from set 2 has to be run as a 4-of. Actually, was that set 3?
Which triple rare? The dog?
The dog. I think that was set.
That was set.
I think it was set 3.
I want to say set 2, but I think I'm wrong.
It's either set 2 or set 3.
But we know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
on
play, search your deck for an order card.
Yeah.
Place it in your drop zone.
Order colonies 4-of.
Yes. We'll get into that when we get into the premium section.
No, I'll get into it a little bit sooner than that, because what I think is interesting about now coming to the end of D format here, right? We're getting these 2 small reveals, right? I don't think there's another one after this one.
I think we have some more cards.
Support cards.
So support cards. We're not.
Yes.
We're probably not getting any more boss cards.
Yes.
Unless they decide to hit us with a new Hexa Orb.
Oh my god!
I think it's just the Orphist and the Zorga are the 2 that we're getting out of the festival collection.
To everybody out there that loves Eugene, Hexorb, and Baron Magnus, we feel for you. Let's take a moment of silence. All right, next. So let's move on to premium. We talked about Overdress for a good chunk of time, and I'm already shaking here. I kind of want to get into the move on with some of these big heavy hitters. They are not boss cards. They're not support cards. They're the future.
They are
correct.
There are brand new G units, Strides, and G guards that we're getting out of P Clan Selection 2022. And I think we'll start with.
I was pulling it up here.
Okay, we'll start with last night and yesterday's reveal. One being from, of course, Vanguard Insider, Mr. Time Leap himself, and then the 2 new Strides that we got from the evening reveals.
Yeah, so we're going to go up from the evening and then to old stuff.
Yes.
So let's begin with Mega Colony.
Mega Colony. So the G Guard is on place. Do you have to flip a G Guard? No.
No. So it is on place or face up in the G zone.
No, the G Guard.
Oh, we're talking about the G Guard.
We're going to start with the G Guard.
Okay. The G Guard is when this unit is placed on Guardian Circle, Soul Blast 1.
Okay.
And this unit gains plus 30k shield until the end of battle.
Yes.
Your opponent can choose any number of their rear guards and rest them.
Yes.
For each one rested, this loses minus 10k.
So technically, your opponent can make this go into negative shield, but that doesn't do anything in terms of guarding. I'm not actually fully certain of that. But for the most part, your opponent can sit there and say, I'm going to rest. I'm swinging 40k at you. You've decided to guard with this G guard. I have 4 standing rear guards. I'll go ahead and pay the cost. That way I'm now hitting over this. I've given up at the very least 1 more attack because I've probably rested my back row.
Yep.
And rested my other attacker. But I've given up that attack to make sure that you're now going to drop more cards from hand. This is looking at it as the opponent of the Mega Colony player. But from the Mega Colony player's side, whatever cards they now have to use to guard this attack, they didn't have to use to guard your other attacker.
Yes, because now it's rested.
Now it's rested, and whatever trigger effects could have been given to it, you no longer have to worry about.
Honestly, I don't know. It's kind of I'm on the fence with this card because it's good for matchups like that are pokes, right? Because you know they're not going to rest it because then all the pokes end. And what I mean by this is multi-attacking decks like Excel decks that are mostly pokes.
Yeah,
they don't exceed past 28. If they're 32, it's on a good day.
Yeah, Aquaforce being a big example of that. And I think the only other one that could probably compare would be Narukami and not being on Bowing Sword.
Yep. But towards decks that are huge and attacking multiple times,
Dimension Police.
they still have the advantage.
Yes.
And I hate to say it, someone's probably going to be like, well, you can G-card twice into this card. It's a 70k shield, but it's attacking again.
Correct.
So what's that 70k shield going to do?
Which Mega Colony does have a tool against multi-attacking in the form of both Brilliant Blisters. But from what we saw with last weekend's Europe event...
Antwerp?
Something like that.
I apologize in advance.
The one that Solemn's team ended up getting first in. With Solemn's list, we didn't actually see old Brilliant Blister in it because newer decks, for the most part, aren't restanding in the Vanguard. The only ones that you have to worry about that are, of course, Overlord decks, Dimension Police decks, and more recently, Regalia decks for Genesis.
And the Overtrigger.
I wouldn't count the Overtrigger because you can't really play around it with Brilliant Blister. You can sit there and try and guard with it each turn, but
you're right.
You're sitting there trying to play the odds against your opponent, which you shouldn't try and do.
It's a shot in the dark.
Yes.
So you bring up Brilliant Blister, right? Mm-hmm. And you did bring up that other decks don't really rewrite, which is true. A lot of decks either they
stand.
They don't stand. But there are decks that do rewrite, which is kind of like the majority of the new decks, like Raging Form. Think Saber still does the rewrite. Then there's cards that weirdly get around it because they unstride and stand the previous Vanguard.
Yeah. For the most part, though, Think Saber is an interesting deck. We have a personal friend, the owner of Kingslayer Games down in Miami, Florida. I'm actually going to put a pause right there, guys. Just FYI, to anyone that's enjoying the podcast right now, we're actually going to have the owner of Kingslayer Cards coming in on Friday for a secret second podcast before next Tuesday. And we're going to be able to talk to him about events, tournament organizing, and then probably a little chat about the meta as well. So stick around for that. That's going to be great. Continue. I apologize for taking you up. No, you're good. But yeah, he plays a Royal Paladin deck that is Majesty Lord Blaster V and a mixture of original Legion Thingsaver and new V Thingsaver. And that's a very interesting deck because of the way that Legion Thingsaver works. It is Counterblast 2, Soul Blast 2. Soul Blast 3.
Yes.
At the end of the battle that it attacked, if it is in Legion, search your deck for a Seeker Thingsaver Dragon, ride it as stand, and then choose a Blaster Blade Seeker from your soul and Legion it. So it forcefully legions. So the original idea of the card was you swung once, Counterblast 2, Soul Blast 3, ride, swing with it again, Counterblast 2, Soul Blast 3, ride a third copy from your deck.
And maybe do it a second time if you had Lou and Barco and can countercharge.
Yes, you could do it a third time if you had 5 damage and a way to get that other damage unflipped for you.
Yes. But in this term, it runs 1 copy of the new V-Clan or semi-new. It's been
a few months.
It's been a few months of the new Thingsaver that says, well, it doesn't say anything. Well, it does say something, but the fact is that you can spend the cost of the old Thingsaver, ride it, and then Legion, the new Thingsaver, even though it's not supposed to, with Blaster Blade Seeker.
Yes. It also allows you to do this with Crystal Luster.
Yes, and you can also gain an additional force.
Yes, which is important. But decks like that in Raging Form aren't seeing too much play in the meta. For the most part, Shadow Paladin is playing Luard due to Luard's tempo ability and the just overall raw power of Morfessa, Drag Principle, Morfessa the Stride. And in combination with Drag Knight, Dagda's ability to allow for multi-attacking in Shadow Paladin, which for the longest time was not really a multi-attacking deck, besides minor little things with like Maiden of Darkness Maka, the one that came from the Legend deck, and things like that. The deck didn't really get multi-attacking. It was just a very good Vanguard push for the longest time. And then that Dagda came out, and it did allow for the deck to do multi-attacking, but at the time of release back in G set 14, it ended on set 14. Divine Dragon Apocrypha was 14, right?
Yes.
Yes. No, that was Ultimate Stride. G set 15 was Divine Dragon Apocrypha. That card came out, and it was seen as a good card. It allowed the deck to do multi-attacking, but there was no real way to abuse it, and then Morfessa came out. But in comparison, Luard can sit there and abuse Morfessa as much as it wants. Raging Dragon, Raging Fall Revengers can't do that. And in the same vein, Seeker Thingsaver Dragon and MLB can't sit there and abuse the ability of Crystal Luster in the same way that the new leading Jewel Knight Salome can. And the fact that she can force a restand, she gives you multiple rearguard attacks at the same time. Those decks are beating out Thingsaver and Raging because they have multiple attacks. But going back to Mega Colony is very good into these decks because Mega Colony has, of course, the original the original Ghidorah Stride that says your opponent can't Superior Call, and both of those decks want a Superior Call.
So the reason that I bring up that the G Guardian is good to those decks is kind of like a two-sided a bit, because I also see an issue with this card. No one's going to rest 3 rear guards for 1 card to guard the attack.
Correct.
Right. They're going to continue attacking and removing the next card.
Yes.
So is this card really up there? I mean, we have cards that are PGing. And a little spoiler ahead, Shadow Paladins and Gear Chronicle both have a PGG Guardian.
They do.
A little expensive, the second one.
Yes.
Shadow Paladins might as well be free.
Yep. I think it'll still be played because the deck still wants to deal with power columns because they don't want to have to sit there and use a perfect guard every time they want to sit there and guard a large attack. They want to be able to sit there and use a G guard to advance their GB towards Optorandus's Generation Break 3. But they also just sit there and, while the deck with Solemn's list is able to generate protect markers and use those as a way to fuel the deck's defensive game, you still want to sit there and use those for attacks that you know you have to not let hit no matter what. So I still think this G-Guard has a place in the G-Zone. It is just your opponent, in most card games, your opponent deciding how your card works does make the card worse. Unless you're getting something beneficial out of it either way.
Like Header Around.
Correct. Well, Header Around isn't your opponent's choice. This card is. Your opponent gets to choose how many of their rear guards they get to rest.
Yes.
For each one that they rest, this card gets -10. But for each one that they rest, that's that much less power that you have to deal with for the rest of the turn.
Yes, that's the card.
So this card, I feel it is good as a one of, but I don't feel that it becomes like Mega Colony's de facto G guard, like some do later down the list. But from here, I think it's a good place to go ahead and transition into Mega Colony's new Stride.
I actually like this Stride.
It is a very interesting Stride because it is the first time we've seen such a repeatable effect like this.
Yes.
So we'll go ahead and...
Let me read it out.
Yes.
Because it's a little confusing at first. Mm-hmm. We've had people already misinterpret it.
We have.
So Vanguard Circle and G-Zone once per turn.
Face up in the G-Zone.
It's also now a hard once per turn.
Correct. It is.
So if you have 2 face up, you can do it.
Yes.
All right. When this unit is placed on if this unit is placed on Vanguard Circle, my apologies, the cost can also be paid with turn a card from your G-Zone face up. Mm-hmm. If this card is face up, you can counterblast 1, put a rear guard into your soul, and choose one of your opponent's standing rear guard, and retire it.
Yes.
If this card was retired, draw 1, countercharge 1. If a card was not retired, your opponent gets minus 10k on his Vanguard.
Correct.
So I kind of butchered that, but there's kind of a reason I butchered it. You're not going to have a standing rear guard.
Generally, no.
No. Well, technically, I'm still thinking Gear Chronicle.
Correct. Most decks will not have a standing rear guard unless you checked a trigger and made their last rear guard not be able to attack. So more often than not, this card is saying your opponent's Vanguard gets minus 10. But as a Vanguard effect, that's not great because you get 3 to 5. You get generally a few pokes throughout the turn. The Scissors really helps with, the Scissors grade 3 really helps with fixing that. But you have to get there first. But instead, going back to the Gridora Stride that Mega Colony has, Gridora's effect is counterblast 1 to choose a face down card in your G zone and turn it face up as an activated ability. For the rest of this turn, or until the end of your opponent's turn, they cannot superior call, and all of their current units do not stand during their next stand phase. So what this now does is it says your opponent can't G-Guard. If they're Nightmare Dolls or Grand Blue or anything like that, Gold Paladin, they're not going to be able to superior call out of the deck, out of the drop, out of the soul. None of that comes through. And if they do not have a backup grade 3 in their hand, they are going to skip their next turn.
So on a pause on that, what is your opinion on Gridora? It's been around for quite a while, right? And a lot of people are now having issues with it.
Yes.
So I'm not bringing up the Vanguardian debate earlier, right? But we have reveals, or not reveals. We have a lot of people coming in, listening to this card, being like, why is this card blocking me from G-Guarding? Why is this card not letting me call anything other than from hand? A good chunk of decks do that, and they were comparing it to Daimonis.
So comparing the two cards isn't particularly fair.
I don't think so, but I do see where they're coming across.
Gridora has always been a card that it is absolutely amazing. It is such a good stride to the point where it is Mega Colony's only stride, essentially, until recently where they've started running Optyrannus again. But we'll get into him in a bit. But Gridora offered the deck an ability to just shut an opponent's turn down. If they don't have a backup grade 3 to ride, they just didn't get a Vanguard swing. None of the rear guards restood, so they had no turn. They drew for turn, and that was generally it, and they passed back over. So you essentially got what Gear Chronicle wanted to do for most of the latter half of G era was take an extra turn. Your opponent got a single card draw. You just got an extra turn. I'd say that's an extremely unfair trade-off because Gridora then actually has a second effect.
We're talking about Chronovisor?
Chronovisor and, to a lesser extent, Lost Break, the GB8.
I heard something, and it was lost in history.
It was. But the GB8 and Chronovisor were both G-era Gear Chronicle cards that said, actually, since the beginning of Gear Chronicle, I forgot, Mystery Flare Dragon also let you take an extra turn. So since the beginning of G era, when Gear Chronicle came out, Gear Chronicle has always been trying to take extra turns because of its time theming and its steampunk theming. But they've always fairly costed it. Mystery Flare was, if it hits, Counterblast 4, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, and if all of them have different grades, you get an extra turn.
Yes.
Now then, if
you failed, you countercharge 4.
You got the Counterblast back.
Yes.
Mystery Flare was fairly costed and was hard to pull off. But it was an extra turn card, and a lot of card games have unless you're playing Magic, very few card games actually have extra turn cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has, I think, only one extra turn card, and it's an Arcana Force card that requires a coin flip.
Uh-huh.
That is the only one in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! But in Vanguard, we ended up initially getting 3. So there was Mystery Flare, there was the GB8, which was Generation Break 8, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, bind the top 8 cards of your deck. You immediately go back to your main phase. You only restand your Vanguard. And you could then proceed to main phase, call down new cards, and then go to your attack phase to then wrap up that extra turn. But that was GB8, bind the top 8 cards of your deck. By that point in the game, if you bound those 8 cards, took that extra turn, and didn't kill your opponent, or didn't beat your opponent, you were going to deck out. So the GB8 wasn't seen as that great of a card. It gave you an extra turn, but it didn't give you the advantage that you wanted because it was so late in the game.
So pulling us back to Ghidorah.
Ghidorah instead just says, Counterblast 1, flip a card face up in your G zone. It's not even GB restricted. All of your opponent's rear guard, all of your opponent's units are rested. None of them can stand, and they cannot superior call until the end of their next turn.
If they don't have a grade 3, they might as well have gotten an extra turn.
Correct. So in decks like, it's a poor example, but Current Gear Chronicle only plays about 5 grade 3s in the entire deck. So if they don't have a backup grade 3 to ride, they just got Time Walked on, which for those who don't know, it's a magic card. Time Walk was one of the original take an extra turn spells. But you just got Time Walked on for such an insanely cheap cost to where even the best version of take an extra turn that Gear Chronicle got in the form of Chronovisor Heritage, which was you had to turn 4 face up Zodiac Time Beast G units face down, and then you were able to take an extra turn skipping your stride step.
Zodiac Time Beast G units.
G units, sorry. So you could use G guards with it.
There was only one G guard that was a Zodiac Time Beast.
Okay. But that was the most competitive version of take an extra turn that Gears got. And Ghidorah is just a better version because you can use it on first stride, you can use it on fourth stride. It doesn't matter which stride you use it on, you can keep using it. And if your opponent does not know to keep a grade 3 in hand, or they simply just did not draw another grade 3, they have simply lost the game right then and there.
So to put you at a final statement for Mega Colony, we have a card that -10, the new card, right?
Yes.
And Ghidorah. Do you see Ghidorah being a increased issue later down the line?
Yes, because Ghidorah also allows for multi-attacking, because her second effect is on attack, Soul Blast 1, search your deck for a grade 3 and call it. And the 2 alternative grade 3s that Mega Colony plays besides the Fabrication Dragon from D-Series, both allow for multi-attacking. One is the giftless grade 3 that says you can rest one of your opponent's rear guards and you can stand one of your rear guards. Both in the same effect, but one isn't constrained to the other. So you can sit there and you can swing with the rear guard, swing with the rear guard, swing with Ghidorah, trigger her effect, call the grade 3 out, untap the other rear guard, and you now get 5 attacks. But if you sat there and used the G unit to give your opponent -10, they're now having to deal with essentially you got a front trigger. The Ghidorah player got a front trigger, in addition to the fact that they also get Persona Ride because of the grade 3 Fabrication Dragon of Ruination being from D-Series and having Persona Ride printed on it.
Okay.
So
all right.
Mega Colony is shaping up to be a very good deck.
But is it an issue?
It may become an issue if the main deck for Mega Colony becomes better and better over time, because we are starting to get these V clan selections that buff up the main decks with new V cards, which is where a bulk of premium comes from right now in terms of the main deck, is V. And now that we're starting to get V cards that actually work, and we're starting to get some D cards even that work for these decks, the better these main decks get, the better Gridora gets.
Okay.
So if we continue in this trend and Gridora gets too many pieces, I think yes. Right now, I think it's keeping the meta in a good triangle lock, because not that long ago we were having complaints about Pale Moon, and specifically Nightmare Dolls being one of the better decks in the format, being so difficult to deal with.
Which is true. Nightmare Dolls have been a very difficult deck because it just kept recycling itself. And there was very few decks that can take care of it. One of the decks that people tried to take care of it was Chaos, which was very difficult because there were decks very similar to Overlord and DP and OTT. Well, those decks in particular, that 86 Chaos from the equation.
Yep.
So, like, it made it very rough to bring a Chaos deck into a matchup to stop Pale Moon, of all things.
Yes.
And now using Gridora, which I'm pretty sure has been around, just no one's tried it with the order till, like, a few weeks back.
I think Order Colony initially got floated when they initially revealed Fabrication Dragon, but it hasn't really, the deck hasn't started to become figured out until recently.
Which is surprising knowing what's in it. Like, looking at the cards now.
Yes.
I feel like all that was missing was draw 3, I'm in.
Yeah, that was the initial idea, was people saw a Fabrication Dragon and they remembered that order from V Era, which is supposed to
Counterblast 3, Soul Blast 3.
You draw 3 cards and your front row gets +10. So you get a plus 30 overall to your board, +3 or +2 to your hand, but it wiped out your resources. But instead, Fabrication Dragon now says, when you ride it, choose an order from your drop zone, ignore its cost, play it. So now you're taking a card that was supposed to be such a heavy loss in resources and such a hard thing to pull off, and now making it free. You get to still draw the 3 cards. You still get to get the 10K to the front row. And if you're Persona Road, you get to draw another card from there. So you're going +3 off of 1 card. And then the deck has more cards that allow you to plus by essentially preventing your opponent from attacking with their rear guards and making protect markers to then beef up your hand even more.
So my final statement before we go into Royal Paladin, because we have been taking a good chunk of time into Mega Colony here, because it's been pulling out a lot of debate.
Yes.
Right. Stoicheia, it's twice now, kind of, that Stoicheia has a card that changes premium.
Yes.
And Fabrication Dragon has to be like the highest one now, right? Compared to Sleeve Tugging Bell.
It does. Fabrication Dragon, technically you can sit there and you can do this combo in any Stoicheia deck.
Yes.
But Mega Colony was the one that it was lacking enough pieces in the main deck that doing this instead just works better. So Gridora is an overall good stride. The new stride as a stride isn't that great.
As a G flip?
As a G flip, it is such an excellent card for the deck.
I feel like that was going to be the case.
Yes.
100% of the time. So actually, let's move it over to Royal Paladin Spin, and I'll probably take lead on this one.
Okay.
Let's start with the G Guardian. This one's going to be kind of quick. When this unit... Sorry, I can't read. I'm reading the Mega Colony one because it was so good. When this unit is placed on Guardian Circle, choose one of your grade 2 units, and until end of turn, it gets plus 10k. And when this unit intercepts Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit until the end of that battle.
It's a PG perfect guard.
There is one issue with this deck, or this card. You need a grade 2 unit.
You do.
Which somebody can take advantage of and pop before battle phase.
Correct.
But it is by far the best Royal Paladin G Guardian.
Which isn't saying much because unfortunately Royal Paladin has been shafted with some of the worst G guards that the entire game has gotten thus far. It has some of the worst G guards, even in comparison to Murakumo.
And we're not saying that Royal Paladin's a bad clan. It is a marvelous clan.
Especially with the way people are figuring out Jewel Knights now.
Well, Jewel Knights, MLB still thing. You have the MLB things here, MLB Jewel Knight. We don't talk about All Mile, but it's there. And I'm just going to give you a quick run through. We're not going to go through every single G Guardian, but I can give you the most likely synopsis of most of the G Guardians. When put on Guardian Circle, if you have a grade 2, if it gains plus 5k. If you have 2 grade 2s, it has plus 10k. If you have 1 grade 2, it gets plus 5k. If you're on a blaster, you can Soul Blast 1, call a grade 1 out, and activate its ability.
Yep.
That is pretty much it. That is all they got. Now, that last one, you need to be on a blaster. It is Marin.
There is one more G Guard.
That's Brave.
Brave. And it's a PG. It is a PG, but it's Brave. And Brave is such a bad mechanic that they printed a starter, a grade 0 that had Forerunner that said Counterblast 1, activate your Brave abilities for the turn. Brave was meta relevant back when it first came out, but that's because Fides had what we now refer to as the battle lore effect. When your opponent would go to guard, they have to guard with 2 or more. And Royals at that point had such a good multi-attack engine that you just were able to drain your opponent's entire hand. But Brave overall as a mechanic, not as a deck, but as a mechanic, was such a poor thing. Because it was what? You had to have 3 cards in hand?
Yes.
You had to have
3 or less.
3 or less. Your effects are alive.
So Brave was only a good mechanic, or this is a fib, but it was an okay mechanic, or it was meant to be a good mechanic for All Mile. But the issue with Brave was that it wasn't a good mechanic for Royal Paladins.
Correct.
Which is very disappointing because a lot of other decks got very good mechanics. Like Thunderstrike was a little different. It kind of wasn't that great, but later became
very good.
Very good. And it, to this day, is probably getting a lot more attention now.
But that's because they transitioned the entirety of Narukami to performing that gimmick. With Brave, they did not transition the entirety of Royals into performing that gimmick. Instead, it was almost the antithesis of what Royals wanted to do.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this G-Guard so good, is the fact that we get to forget about that Brave stuff. We get to just leave it in the past.
It never existed.
Never existed. We now get a G-Guard that says, if I have a grade 2, it gets plus 10 shield. And if I want to, I can make that grade 2 a perfect guard, which is so excellent in a deck that desperately was lacking in defensive capabilities. Because it's a force clan. So the point of it was, I'm going to kill my opponent before they have a chance to build up defenses. Unfortunately, a lot of decks these days, like the previously mentioned Mega Colony, can build up so much resources just on grade 3 that they're not going to die.
Yep.
Now this deck has the ability to weather that difference and help close up that gap and then go for the kill.
So going actually now into the stride, because I feel like we're going to be back to back on these
I don't
cards.
like the art.
They're so good. You don't like the art. That's fair. That's fair. It looks like not even a Sanctuary Guard card. It looks more like Sanctuary of Light.
It does.
But the card is Holy Knight of Exalt. That's not Exalt. Exalted. And then Elugian.
Let me see.
Yeah. How do you say that?
I'll give it a crack. So, Holy Knight of the Exalted, Eulogius.
Eulogius?
Yes, like eulogy.
Haven't read one.
So, yes.
So, when this unit attacks, cost Counterblast 1, turn a card in your G zone face up, draw the number of cards equal to the number of your rear guards, and call the same number of cards to rear guard circle. So, they don't be just over them, which is good.
Correct.
It's not Jewel Knights. Then,
But
if you have 5 or more rear guards, get an imaginary gift force.
yes.
Which is the second card right next to, I believe, Aquaforce.
Aquaforce doesn't
No, yes, the new one generates an Excel.
Okay, it does.
Okay, so this is the second stride that generates an imaginary gift. So you don't have to play. You can play Bastion Premium now.
You can.
It's not going to be good
It's not, unfortunately.
because you have to stride into this.
Yes. Which Bastion can do in spades. But it's the matter of living to that point.
But overall, this card kind of gives the Jewel Knight ability slightly.
It gives the Salome ability.
Yes, to a few of the other future Royal Paladin cards. Because Crystal Luster is still a phenomenal card. And both Salome and MLB are great grade 3s to copy the ability of.
Yes.
And they also get quad drives. So you're kind of missing out on these quad drives. You do get multi-attack, but you've already gotten multi-attack.
You do, but with the Jewel Knights deck at the very least, Salome can still give you the quad drive.
Yes.
Salome,
For a counterblast.
For a counterblast and the extra 10k. But you still get Salome's effect of being able to call down a board, and generally, you didn't want to use Salome's Soul Blast 4 to restand effect until you're at GB3 with Crystal Luster. This gives the deck a good first stride because you still get Salome's effect of getting extra attacks. Now you're drawing extra cards on top of that in order to fuel that effect.
So you're saving a turn.
So you're saving a turn.
All right.
And you're not sitting there and going, well, my opponent's already built up so much resources, and if I call down the 3, I'm losing those cards, and I'm probably going to minus out and maybe lose on the next turn. Now I just get to draw back up and then play down the cards. And they don't even have to necessarily be Jewel Knights.
Yes. So overall, it's a good first stride, but not a very...
No.
It's not a finisher, or it's not...
No, I don't think so. The deck still... If you're playing an MLB-focused deck, you're still going into Crystal Luster first. That's just plain and simple. Crystal Luster gives you that extra drive check off of MLB, gives you the extra 5k, gives you the extra crit, and you still get this extra force markers off of its ability to pull 2 things into Soul. So with MLB, you're still going to first stride Crystal Luster, flip up Ganslot, and move from there. But in any other deck going forward that doesn't have that powerful of a grade 3 effect that you can skip a turn not using it, this stride's going to be very good for that.
Yes. So now moving to my second favorite deck.
He has 4 ASR Chrono Jets.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I do.
He took the time to buy the 4 ASR Chrono Jets. I don't even know.
Did I buy all 4? I don't remember anymore.
You did. I don't think you traded for all of them.
No, I think I traded for the first one.
Maybe.
I can't remember. But yes, I do have 4 ASR Chrono Jets. And yes, we're talking about Gear Chronicle. But Eric did a great job introducing the Gear Chronicle cards. And it's, at first I read them and I was kind of like upset that it was Steam Maiden and slightly happy I could play a different Gear Chronicle deck.
I'm going to go ahead and say this. I think both of the cards are very mid. They're not that great for the deck.
I think they're like the Mega Colony cards. They're support cards. And we're going to get into that now.
Okay.
So, our first card, we're going to do G Guardians first always. Interdimensional Dragon, History Vision Dragon. You see, it has history in the name.
It does, like the other 2.
Yes.
So
when this unit is put on Guardian Circle, discard 1 or more cards with the sum of their grade being 3 or greater from your hand. And this unit gains plus 20k shield until the end of battle. If you discarded cards with the sum of their grade being 6 or greater for this cost, Counterblast 1, choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit until the end of that battle.
I don't like the fact that the PG effect cost a counterblast when you're already having to discard 2 cards at a minimum.
I completely agree with you. But in my opinion, this card is better than the G Flip Alluro.
Uluru?
Yes. Counterblast 1, turn a G Guardian from your G zone face up, and it gains 5k for every face-up card in your G zone. And yes, it would be bigger, but a good majority of cards in Gear Chronicle count as grade 3 when discarded. If we take into account the dog that says on place reveal grade 3 or greater, search your deck for a grade 3, and then discard cards from your hand equaling grade 3.
Lost Gear Dog 8.
Yes. It says when this card will be discarded from your hand.
Counts as grade 3.
If you're on a Chronojet Vanguard, it counts as a grade 3, and it's not during your turn.
Same thing if you have Smoke Gear, the V Smoke Gear Dragon.
Yes.
If you have a Chronojet, its first ability is just an attack ability, but its second effect is continuous. If you're on Chronojet Dragon or Chronojet Vanguard?
A Chronojet Dragon.
Okay, so specifically Chronojet
When you
Dragon.
would discard cards from your hand, they count as grade 3.
Yes.
Which I'm not 100% sure if I'll end up on a Smoke Gear at the end of my turn for them to retire it.
Yeah.
So that's a little iffy. I would actually stick with the Lost Gear Dog A and a grade 3, probably Mellow Amusement.
Or one of the grade 4s in the deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So it will cost 2 cards from hand to PG, but it honestly, I think it's kind of fair for a deck that, bless you.
Thank you.
So very iffy. I do agree. It's slightly mid. It's a counterblast. It's discard 2 to PG. If I discard 1 grade 3, it's a plus 20k shield, which is kind of rough because you already have Gear Cat getting plus 10 if you go into header round. So most of my cards are already 20k shield. It would have to be used for a turn like your Dimension Police.
Yeah.
Because you can't pop. That's another thing. They're not Sentinels.
Correct.
So you can't pop them. Killed you.
Not with the stand trigger, but we'll get into some more of the DP discussion once we get to Chris or different fights reveal for Dimension Police, which I think will be the second to last reveal we'll go over today.
Yeah. We'll try to get Joe some of these quickly because there's a lot. Yeah. And we got past the time that we assumed. We're already like an hour and 10 minutes.
Okay.
So let's go into the next one. Highbrow Steam Shish Lisma.
Let me see.
Shilisma.
Probably Highbrow Steam Shlishma.
Shlishma.
Yes. Shlishma.
These names are getting harder.
Shlishma what?
Okay. So this one's actually the one that you disagree with. You think it's mid.
I think it is so aggressively mid that you can run it as a one of, but from all of my experience playing the deck, which is less than yours, but just my experience in playing card games that is general, this card does not feel like it takes up a spot in your G zone as it stands right now, which is a very tight spot.
Yes.
Even as a one of, is a very tight spot in Gear Chronicle.
Okay. So we're going to get into the skill, and I'll probably give my dot on it really quick. Auto. Once per turn, when this unit attacks, bind a front row rear guard, turn a card from your G zone face up, and then choose up to 2 cards from your bind zone and call them to separate rear circles. Or just call them to rear circles. They don't have to be separate. Mm-hmm. And all your front row units get plus 10k until end of turn. This is really kind of big for Steam Maidens because, first off, it's not a counterblast.
Yes.
Which is the majority of the Steam Maiden issue when coming into premium. Secondly, you're not going up a grade. So wherever you stopped with Steam Maidens, you can go back and then repeat the process.
Correct. But with Steam Maidens, they want to be on their grade 3 to sit there and then facilitate multi-attacking even more. And unfortunately, this card, it does have a second effect, but that second effect doesn't involve striding down.
No.
And if we look at Gear Chronicle as it stands right now, which is a Chronojet focus in terms of what is considered to be the more competitive build, with that Chronojet focus, you are performing time leaps, so you are putting cards into your bind. But you generally don't sit there and put like 2 cards a turn into your bind.
No.
Without doing a different stride, which is history build. So the deck just doesn't facilitate enough bound cards in its competitive form to make this first effect viable.
Yes. So I see it currently as a tester or in development to building a whole new part of Gear Chronicle, because we can't have Chrono Jet forever. And a lot of people did want Zodiac Time Beast to come back, which could end up being an issue or not, because there's not really a good Chrono Tiger right now that can be used in Premium.
No, but if they make good Zodiac Time Beast strides, it does make Chrono Visor a viable card again.
And then also makes Chrono Jet a lot better, because then you can go into Chrono Visor Heritage again.
Yep.
So that's the neg right there. How do you get Chrono Jet off the table?
Yes. Bushy has very much so planted in the ground that the main Gear Chronicle deck is almost always going to be Chrono Jet.
Yes. So let's get into the second skill that actually makes it kind of viable, and you can maybe get 2 in. I'm gonna go for 2. I'm probably gonna have the opportunity to. G Zone. At the end of battle, your grade 3 rearguard attack, if this card is face up, Soul Blast 1 and bind that unit, and call this card to rearguard circle. So you're able to call it the Highbrow Steam. I'm just gonna call it a maiden, even though it's not a maiden, to the field, grade 4 on the rearguard circle. Now, I do believe it leaves at the end of turn. It does not really say that anywhere in the card.
If it doesn't specify, I believe it does stay on board. We'd probably have to email Bushy to get an actual ruling on it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, most of those cards, like the Murakumo cards.
I have to read the Pale Moon one, which is probably the one that's going to answer my question.
Or the Murakumo cards.
The Murakumo one dominates and takes from your opponent's side.
So that's Nubatama.
Whoops.
Murakumo has a Yasui Stride that calls 2 copies out of the G-Zone.
Okay. But let's assume that it goes back.
Yes.
Right. First off. This is actually kind of a finisher, because, most of the time you're pushing in with your time leap turn, right? You're going back and forth between Mellum and History Maker. You're able to, after, let's say you do Gear Groovy or History build, you call 2 Mellums out, you get yourselves 1 TikTok, and on the Mellum you build up to a History Maker. That Mellum goes down to another TikTok. You can go to the grade 3 and time leap something else that was on the field to get an additional attack there, and History Maker will become the grade 3 attack, become the grade 4, and if that unit that you time leaped earlier was a grade 2, that's a grade 3 now, swinging in, and then you're able to get a sick and attack in. Mind you, you went into Mellow Amusement. They have to guard 2 or more after your Gear Groovy swing. This could end up being like that final attack no one asked for.
It could, but I'm not seeing it is unfortunately the case for me, because generally you want to play Mellow Melodious during the main phase, so that way for the entirety of the turn, your opponent has to guard with 2 cards. If you sit there and say, well, for the first half of this turn, you can just do normal guarding. During the second half of this turn, now I'm going to switch over and make you guard 2 or more cards. It's not as impactful, because with decks like Shadow Paladin and their ability with Dagda plus Morfessa, if that first Dagda swing doesn't have the Morfessa skill to make your opponent drop, is it 2 or 3 cards? I think it's 2. It's 2, because Chain Ranker is 3. If they don't have that ability, you can guard that attack so much easier. So if you're predicating playing this card off of playing Melodious later in the turn than you normally would, I think it inherently makes the card bad. Because you also want normally you put Melodious behind the Vanguard because you don't care about giving it a booster. Your other columns, you care about giving them boosters because it's usually Mellum and TikTok who aren't that big by themselves. You have to give them force markers to beef them up enough. So predicating this G unit's ability to be played off of playing your terms suboptimally to me sounds like a bad card.
I don't know what to say there. But this is all going to come into testing. We're going to be probably testing, I want to say, the heck out of P clan selection.
Oh, yeah.
I'm already planning on getting a case of it. So that's going to be a fun day for me, trying to figure out what all these cards are useful for, what decks are going to become viable, and what can I bring out as a YouTube video later back on my channel. But moving on, we next have Spike Brothers, which I actually don't know much about it.
So I did ask one of the Florida's premier Spike Brothers players, Marshall, and he said this stride is very good. He enjoys it very much. Right now, Spike Brothers has been in a weird place because Crazy 8 hasn't been that good for a while. Hellhard is still a good stride, but doing the Crazy 8 deck, which is you forego healing in your deck to just sit there and you're going to put all of your heal triggers in your hand, you're going to G-Guard with all of them, and you're going to get to GB8 as fast as you can, and then go into Hellhard 8 the first chance that you get. And that has been Spikes for such a long time now, and now they're finally able to transition away with that, specifically because of Rising Nova having an effect that made Daimonis banned, but currently doesn't cause that level of issues yet, but she has to be very careful with what they print in Dark States for Overdress and what they print in Spike Brothers going forward because of Rising Nova's ability to copy Grade 3's abilities that you have on your field. But currently Rising Nova is you copy Dudley Emperor and Greedon's effects to get multiple waves of attacks off, including Vanguard attacks. This new stride allows you to be able to pace yourself into that turn if you don't have all the pieces, because you can then end your turn with the pieces that you need, which generally is just getting both of the Grade 3s on board. This card is when it attacks Soul Blast 1, flip a card in your G zone face up, search your deck for any 2 cards, call them to open regard circles.
I'm not sure. I could bring it up.
You call them either way, and all of your units gain boost until end of turn. So if you're missing Greedon and Dudley Emperor, you can now search for them.
Empty rearguard circles.
Empty rearguards. So you can now search for them, play them, and if your opponent doesn't have interaction during their turn to get rid of them off of your board, on your following turn, you can now do the Rising Nova combo and sit there and kill your opponent doing that.
So you're bringing up Rising Nova.
Yes.
Is Rising Nova going to become viable? Do you see it in comparison to, like, let's say, Mega Colony that we were talking about earlier?
It's hard to say because I don't have them.
You strictly thought about Gridora, didn't you?
Correct. Gridora stops this deck. Optorandus, which we didn't actually cover, just real quick, Optorandus is counterblast, GB3 counterblast to discard a card. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, they can only call cards from hand, which shuts down almost the entirety of Dark Zone / Dark States. Like, as a nation, all of those decks sit there and call from specifically other than hand.
Yes.
Optorandus just shuts that down. If the meta shifts in a way that Mega Colony isn't as prevalent, which it's not that prevalent right now, it's a building force. With Solemn winning the team event last weekend in Europe, with him piloting Mega Colony or Order Colony, we're definitely going to see an increase in players. But until this weekend, which is actually going to be Chicago, that will be the true test as to whether or not Order Colony has become the dominating force. If it has become the dominating force, unfortunately, Spike Brothers isn't going to be that good.
Okay. At least you're honest.
Yes.
So moving on from Spike Brothers, we got Aquaforce, and I think we may cut it. Let's see what's after Aquaforce really quick.
Shadows.
DP. We'll end it on DP.
Okay.
So we got a little bit of that because we did have Gray Nature and Shadow Paladin pre-revealed, and Narukami. So we'll go after Narukami. We'll do DP and then Narukami. Okay. But let's get into Blue Wave really, or Aquaforce, not Blue Wave. Blue Wave. Starting with the G Guardian, we got Rebellious Heavenly Flow General Dynera. When this unit is put on Guardian Circle, counterblast 1 and perform the following depending on which battle of the turn it is. First battle, choose one of your units and it gets plus 5k until the end of turn, which could be your Vanguard.
Yep.
Fourth battle or more, this unit gets plus 20k shield.
Yep.
It's got to be one of like the smallest G Guardians.
In terms of impact, yeah, what they're trying to do with it.
It's also a counterblast, which is kind of weird because a lot of the G Guardians kind of charge.
They do, but Aquaforce has fairly good resource management thanks to the V-era version of Light Signal's Penguin Soldier, or as we affectionately refer to him as Anakin. That gives the deck a fairly decent countercharging. This G-Guard probably was just designed in the facet that, for the most part, Aquaforce has the G-Guards it wants and needs. It doesn't need more G-Guards. If they sit there and try and make better G-Guards, they'll end up making ones that are too good. So, for the most part, Aquaforce has the G-Guards that it needs. They don't need better ones. Mm-hmm. What they did need, however, was the new stride that they got. They needed something that was a good alternative to Gamble, is the current first stride that they go into.
Gamble, the one that draws?
Yes.
Yes.
So that's for draws a lot Aquaforce.
But it doesn't really push, which is kind of weird because I feel like after that turn, your opponent has the advantage because they'll take away what you use to gain resources, and then you're left with only the resources to call out. And if you don't finish that turn,
yes,
the game ends.
Yes.
So that brings me into Blue Furious Charge Dragon. Furious Dragon?
I would have to read it.
It's Furi.
Let's see. Furiagus.
I was close. Furious.
Yes.
Kind of weird. Kind of almost sounds like Conquering Supreme Dragon, Conquest Dragon. But getting into the skill, at the end of battle, this unit attacked, counterblast 1 and turn a card from your G zone face up. You get an imaginary gift, Excel. Choose up to same number of your rear guards as the number of face up cards in your G zone and stand them. Then choose up to one of your rear guards and move it to an open additional rear guard, and it gets plus 10k until end of turn. I love that it gives Excel. Back to the way Force worked, you can play a deck that doesn't inherently have Excel. Example, and kind of a funny one, Flagberg
or V Thavas. Or not Thavas, Valios.
And regular Valios.
Yes. All three of those cards do not inherently make Excel markers, so you are trying to give up that ability to play those cards instead, and this helps mitigate that. But it works better with like Thavas deck and the V Thavas and the V Blue Wave decks that have the ability to make the Excel markers. This card is extremely good with the Blue Wave Grade 1 from the last V clan selection that they gave Blue Wave support in. Because that Grade 1 says, at the end of the battle that it attacked, counterblast 1, switch its position with another rear guard, and then restand it. And this card then gets 10k. You can now sit there, do that, swing, boost with it, swing with this Vanguard, restand it, and then move it out of where it was to that new open rearguard circle, swing with it, use its effect again, swap its position again if it isn't once per turn.
Be careful with that mic.
Yeah. If it is once per turn, then unfortunately that combo just doesn't work. I'm just going off of memory with this combo. But if it isn't once per turn, this makes this singular grade 1. And a lot of the position swapping cards that Aquaforce got way back in the day, that much better.
Yep, and I do want to slightly bring up that Jaime did go in depth on the video of a few plays that you can do, including Riptide. Surprisingly, I haven't seen Riptide in a while.
Yeah, Riptide is, if it's on an additional rearguard circle, it gets an additional plus 20. So, again, to your point, or no, it can't attack unless it's on an additional rearguard circle, right?
Riptide?
No, Riptide is, it can't attack unless it's the 4th battle or more of that turn. So if you're able to sit there and do a fair amount of multi-attacking with the deck, get to that 4th battle, swing with Riptide, you now have a way to restand Riptide, who's at a base a 32k beater, before adding on triggers or markers. It is just a 32k beater. Then if you're restanding that, swinging with it some more, that makes it that much more choice of a target.
That much more choice. I love that. But moving from the Aquaforce, it's very interesting, the Aquaforce side of things. If you guys want to know more about Aquaforce, I really do recommend checking out Commander Jaime. He does extensive research into that.
He has been a part of the community for an extremely long time. I've been playing since the Gold Rutile trial deck. And
Gold Rutile.
I think I remember seeing him on the wiki back in those days, sitting there and going over, well, not specifically with Gold Rutile, I think more towards the Limit Break era with the original Tetra Drive Dragon. I think I remember seeing him on the wiki forums and the Pojo forums discussing the cards at that time. So he is definitely the man that's been going in depth and cares deeply about this clan. And the fact that he was one of the people that got to reveal this one of his clan's cards, because there were multiple YouTubers getting reveals for their clans.
Yep, I would stick around and check those out. No, not stick around, but go check those out. Where I think we have 2 more left. We have
TIE Fighter, we have Outer Orange,
and Kai from WCC.
So we have 3 more.
So do check those wonderful YouTubers out. Ty, very funny. You guys are gonna love his what are those things called? Soft opens or hard? When you do like a skit in the beginning before going into like the show.
I'm not fully certain, but he has very good openings.
Yes, they're really good. They're really funny. And then don't forget about checking out our Orange. Also, great content creator.
Yep. We actually met her at one of the, I think there were still Golden Phoenix games at that point.
Yeah, so go to Phoenix Games, now Kingslayer cards. And she did get an invite, so she may be coming to the Invitational later this year, which more information will come maybe Friday. Don't know yet. Stay tuned. But also Kai WCC, great content creator. I don't know what they're revealing yet. The good chance Sci-Fi reveals Novas.
Yes.
Which is weird because it's a cover card.
It is, but I think it's okay. Some cover cards don't deserve the stream reveal. Some of the cover cards should get that card of the day YouTuber reveal to help give them a bit more focus and not have all this clutter around them that the stream reveals have. Yep. Stream reveals, you have to sit there and wait through whatever new products they're revealing, whatever new playmats, sleeves, deck boxes, things like that. More recently, we've, of course, been having to go through the collaboration sets reveals, which are a bit of a drag because a majority of these cards just haven't been that great.
So we're talking about stream reveals, and there's a stream reveal that I think caught your eye very early. Actually, the earliest one. D-Police.
D-Police. So I am, in terms of premium, I'm currently a D-Police main. I do play Narukami, Eradicators as well.
No, you don't.
I play Eradicators.
No, you don't.
I don't play a Draconic Descendant focus like the madman that also owns 4 ASR Draconic Descendants.
Yeah, I do.
I play a more Vowing Sword focus. Personally, I'm actually not. As when I first started in Vanguard, Draconic Descendant was my favorite card. One of my favorites.
It's still my favorite.
I don't like V Descendant all that much in terms of card effects. He's a good finisher, but if you ride him and then go into Stunverse and then come back off of him and you don't have any other effects to go with him, he's not that great. You just take the hit and then that's it. He's good if you combo him with like Gauntlet Buster as he was designed to do, where you sit there and you have like 3+ crits and your opponent has to guard it. But otherwise, if you're past the on ride turn, he's not that great to me, at least.
We'll get into Narukami in a bit after this one.
But we'll go over D-Police, which is one of my favorite clans. I've enjoyed giant robots for a long time now, much in the same vein as Different Fight or Chris, who I actually watched to get the build that I have now. Majority of it is actually based off of the BRO list. But we'll start off with the Stride, Cosmo Winger, Unibird Galaxy. So it has 2 effects. First is the continuous Vanguard Circle. This card gets plus 10,000 for each point of damage you have in each of your rear guards. The second effect is a burst effect, which we'll go into why this matters here in a bit. But if it is when it attacks, you may pay the cost, which is no counterblast. Just turn a face down card in your Z zone face up. Depending on the power that it has, it gets the following effects or buffs. At 50k or greater power, which just means between your rear guards and damage, you just have to have 3 cards. It gets an extra critical. So if you've gone Force 2, this is now a 3 damage swing. So your opponent probably has to perfect guard it in order to ensure that the over trigger doesn't just kill them. Then, if it has 10,000 or greater power...
100,000.
100,000 or greater power, it gets plus 2 drive. So you're now swinging for 3 crit on Force 2, 5 drive checks. This does usually mean that between your damage and rear guards, you have to have 8 cards without any outside effects. If you're playing Commander Laurel, it makes it a little bit easier. The Commander Laurel, of course. So this is a good alternative first stride to Geomaglass. Geomaglass is currently D-Police's best first stride, but sometimes your opponent will damage deny you because they're afraid of that extra crit that Geomaglass can bring, or that Die Liner can bring. So they'll sit there and they'll just damage deny, they'll pass turn, and they'll try and avoid that. And currently what the deck has as a first no counterblast stride is Strongest Command Chief Final Dimax DX, which doesn't have the burst ability, but on attack, flip a face down card in your G zone face up, take all of your rested rear guards, shove them into Soul. Then look at the top 7 cards of your deck. For each face up card in your G zone, starting with the highest power, you can call a card to rear guard circle.
I really dislike that card.
It is not amazing.
You getting rid of most of the grade 3s you kind of want to leave in deck.
Yes.
And I do think that that's slightly a neg.
It is.
And if you top 7, all of them are grade 3, then you have nothing to really boost the power of.
Correct. There is a bit more to the effect that states if you put 4 or more rear guards into Soul, everything you call gets, or everything on your board just gets 10 in a crit, including himself. So currently, that's our best alternative no counterblast stride outside of the Progenitor Dragon, and that's a bit iffy. What Uniwinger, or not Uniwinger, Unibird does is, because it has the burst effect, we can now use our PG, Enigma Calm, who says at the end of the battle that your Vanguard with the burst ability attacked, you can counterblast one, soul blast one, which kind of contradicts what we're going through, to add it back to your hand. If you're at 35k or greater power. If you're at 45k or greater power, though, you get to countercharge. So in the event you don't want to go into Geomaglas, you instead want to go into this for whatever reason, but you still have the counterblast, you can now recur multiple Enigma Calms equal to the amount of soul that you have. The second part that makes this card so good is if we're getting into the late game, we're running out of counterblast because DP, unfortunately, has very limited countercharging. You can go into this, and because it has the burst ability, it combos with one of what I think is the best cards in Dimension Police, because it is this is an effect, not specifically this card, but it is an effect that put DP onto the competitive map way back in Break Ride era. But this is a stand trigger from the G era, Operator Girl Linka. She is a Generation Break 2, which unfortunately means she doesn't combo too well with First Stride Unibird, but she's Generation Break 2. If your Vanguard is at 20k or greater power, put her into Soul Draw card. So if you're on Stride, you're automatically hitting the number that you need to draw a card. But she then has a second effect that if you fulfilled the two conditions, you're at 35k or greater power, and you're on a Vanguard with the burst ability, it gains the following effect until end of turn. Whenever your drive check reveals a grade 3, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's Sentinels and ignore its cannot be hit effect. This is what makes DP such a lethal deck. And the fact that you go Force 2, give your Vanguard an extra crit. Initially, this combos with Excalibur, which is able to restand, get one extra drive check, and gets extra power. So the Bravest Peak Excalibur lets you sit there and is generally your kill turn. You're just trying to kill your opponent with this stride. You generally want to do it as second stride, but if you can't meet the power conditions, it's kind of hard to do that because you have to have face-up cards in your G-Zone to do it. But Unibird now lets us, if we have a full board and say 1 damage, we can counterblast 1, use Commander Laurel V to rest 4 rear guards. He will then go from 68,000 power to 136,000 power, fulfilling both of his conditions for his crit and extra drive, and then move Linka into Soul to then give him the guard break ability. You're now swinging 100. If you have Linka as one of those 4, move her into Soul, you'll move from 136 down to 126 because Laurel doubles the power at that point.
And the critical.
And
adds a critical.
Adds a critical. So if you lose any power, you lose it in the normal increment. You don't double the loss. So now you're at 126, 4 critical, 5 drive checks, and the ability to ignore specifically Sentinel perfect guards. Your opponent is going to have such a terrible time guarding this card that they sometimes just won't guard, and they're just going to take it to see if they can live it. Because currently, the only decks that can just outright take their hand, dump it out, and guard is Bermuda Triangle. If they're able to chain G guards correctly,
yep,
they can just build up a bigger hand and then dump it all down to guard the attack. In my playtesting with our group, they've gotten up to a 200k mark to where I couldn't even break through. The only way I could was with a perfect guard or the over trigger. But against any other deck, like say Nightmare Dolls or Order Colony draws a bunch of cards, but they're all 5 and 10Ks and they don't gain a bunch of extra shield. This card now says, you have to perfect guard me or you're going to take this 4 crit. And if I check the over trigger, it's now 8 crit.
So going past the ungodly number that is a Unibird Galaxy,
Yes.
what do you think about Giant Armored Beast? How do you say it? Gurag?
I don't even remember the name because it's such a new card, but Gira Gamelgus. Gira Gamelgus. This is an excellent G-Guard for Dimension Police. So the other gimmick of Dimension Police, because so early on in the game, or in the clan's life, they introduced check a grade 3, break guard. So you wanted to play more grade 3s in the deck. But the inherent disadvantage to that was they have no shield. So, starting in the G era with Super Dimensional Robo Dynexus gave them shield value, which was really good at that time. We then got into the V era. Initially, the V era didn't give us that much in terms of the ability to convert those cards into shield. They actually got no cards. But in the second wave of support for Dimension Police, there was Super Dimensional Robo Die Liner, which is currently still the key card of the entire deck. In its first effect, which is its most important effect, Continuous Vanguard Circle, all of your grade 3s get 10,000 shield. So now you convert all of these extra grade 3s that you're having to run into your deck into 10k shields. But now we'll go back into another card that we discussed earlier, Geomaglass, which says for face up on Vanguard Circle or G-Zone, all of your grade 3s get plus 5,000 power, the ability to intercept, and another plus 5,000 shield. So if you first stride Geomaglass and have Die Liner on board, your grade 3s are now 20k shields. Those are V-era heal triggers.
So I feel like you're kind of torn a little bit. Because this G-Guardian works very well with Geomaglass.
Correct.
But then there's Unibird, who is probably starting to look like the most threatening for a stride.
If we can fulfill its conditions. If we can't, Geomaglass is still an excellent first stride. This just gives us more options for our first stride and even second stride, because sometimes on that second stride we can't do Bravest Peak Excalibur. But what this card now lets us do is we can be more aggressive with our grade 3 usage in the early game, because this card's effect is when placed on Guardian Circle, Soul Blast 1, choose up to 2 normal unit grade 3s, add them to your hand, and then for each card that you added to hand, it gets plus 5 shield. So the reason for this is because of Heal Guardians being grade 3s. That's why the normal unit part is in there. But now you can sit there and go, I play down Die Arm, who has the potential to give my front row a cumulative of 90k power. So I can call that down, give my front row 30k each, and then I can intercept it with it during my opponent's turn. I can also use Dizoris to give my Vanguard an extra drive, which then shoves itself into Soul. So I intercept with the Die Arm. I G-Guard with this new G-Guard, Soul Blast out the Dizoris. I can now add both of those back into my hand. They're now either stride fodder, set up for my next turn, or I can use them to guard more attacks. Because this is inherently just a +1. And it's such an amazing effect that previously Dimension Police's G-Guards were actually pretty good up until the introduction of the Heal Guardians, because between Die Liner and Geomaglass, you could get more shield than what your G-Guards can put out.
Yes.
Now you have a reason to use your G-Guards more thoroughly because of the fact that you can now recur to grade 3s. That now means whatever stage of the game that you're in, if you have 4 Geomaglasses face up, this is now an extra 60k shield that you just added to your hand. It's such an amazing effect. Now then, of course, we have to go back over to Order Colony.
Where does that put you?
Gridora prevents us from G-Guarding, so it prevents us from using this card.
Ah.
But
That's so weird, honestly, that Gridora kind of like has the area on 2 fronts. So we're first coming in and we stop multi-attacking decks from being able to call anywhere from hand. So Jewel Knight still has the advantage because they do call from hand. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you're a clan that attacks heavily with your Vanguard alone, and you work off your G Guardians, so like example is Overlord is dependent on Denial Griffin.
Correct.
You're dependent on these grade 3s coming back to your hand. And you can't even G Guard. And even if you could have G Guarded, you can't put, you could put the grade 3s to your hand. So you're fine there.
Yes.
But
so
I feel like you're kind of like you're higher than rock, paper, or scissors at that point.
It is, but in the DP matchup with Mega Colony, if they make the choice to go into Gridora, they cannot stop my Excalibur from happening.
Yep.
If they instead go into Optorandus, so actually I have this backwards. Gridora makes it harder for me to G-Guard, so it makes it harder to Excalibur. But it doesn't stop me from using Unibird and calling more cards down to buff up Unibird's stats. But if they instead go into Optorandus to stop Unibird, they're not stopping me from G-Guarding, so it's easier to go into Excalibur. So Dimension Police, in terms of tools, has a fairly decent matchup into Order Colony. I have to do a bit more playtesting with our local person who plays it, but it still feels like a good matchup.
Well, this is understandable. This is all theory crafting.
Yes.
In the dojo, but we'll get more answers as we go along.
Yep.
I actually think it's time we go into our final, not really final, it's the last one for today because we kind of did run off past our usual schedule time or the assumed time. But, Vanguard is very interesting, and going further into the topic of theory crafting, where the cards can go and what could be an issue, which I think Mega Colony came up a lot, is good to know and take forward in here. But we get into our final card, and I do want to put a little bit of a backstory on this card, actually. So, Narukami has had an issue not only from a certain Stoicheia card called Sleeve Tugging Bell, but has also fallen short on very intelligent players not binding.
Not making a board and not guarding early.
And not binding normal units.
Yes.
Which I am finally glad they gave me an alternative to this scenario. Because they're going to not bind normal units. It's in their drop zone. You can see it.
Yep.
So that brings me to the newest card. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. Conquering Supreme Dragon.
Extermination Dragon?
Extermination Dragon.
Extermination Dragon.
It's kind of weird. It's like they're trying to make it sound like Demolition.
A little.
But starting it off, auto, when placed on Vanguard Circle, Soul Blast 1 for each of your opponent's empty front row rear guard circles and draw 1.
So there's a comma there. So it's not Soul Blast 1 for each of your opponent's open rear guard circles. It's Soul Blast 1, end of cost. You draw a card for each of your opponent's open rear guard circles.
I think Proof Card has a little mistake here because it still says for each.
Let me see it real quick.
Yeah, you can go right ahead. Soul Blast 1 or Soul Blast for each overall is still nothing crazy. I mean, we're talking about a good chunk of force decks.
Yeah.
That are in the premium meta. Like we just talked about earlier, we have even Protect decks, not just counting force. We got Mega Colony. We got
OTT.
Dimension Police. Shadow Paladins. OTT, like you said. A good chunk of Protect and Force decks. So you're not very worried about drawing past 2. So Soul Blast 2, if it is the case, is not bad.
So there's a bracket at the end. So it's Soul Blast 1 for each open. Soul Blast 1, end of cost for each of your opponent's open rear guard circles, draw a card.
Okay.
Open front row rear guard circles.
That's great.
Yes.
If I fight Excel, I'm going to deck out.
Yes.
I will not need Stunverse ever again. But going past that, this solved probably my biggest issue past the on-play skill, which is Act. Counterblast 1. For each of your opponent's empty front row rear circles, all of your front row units get plus 10k until the end of turn. Now, there is one issue with this card.
Counterblast.
Yes, it's a Counterblast 1. Oh, you're right. I see how you mean it.
Yes. Because there's that end bracket. At
Yeah,
the end
so
of Soul Blast
you don't Soul Blast one for each. You Soul Blast one, and then for each, you draw one.
Yes.
I get what you mean. Same thing with the second skill, which is not bad. One counterblast. The issue that I have with this card is that it doesn't remove any rear guards.
It doesn't. It is inherently designed to punish your opponent for trying to play around Stunverse, which I think is what the deck needed. It didn't need more removal. The deck has plenty of removal as it stands.
And I do feel like this card was meant for one clan in particular. I-ho, 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 I-ho. Oh, wait. Yo-ho, pirates life for me. Wow,
Grambo.
how did I mess that up?
Hi-ho is
Is
7 dwarfs.
I know.
But
I'm
yes.
kidding.
I don't think this was specifically built for Grand Blue. It is very good into Grand Blue because they'll sit there and they'll do their little thing of just...
They'll hollow.
They'll get rid of their front row.
They will hollow, they'll use their boat. That thing's dying at the end of the turn. I'm well aware of that.
And they'll use Skull Dragon, and all of those will disappear.
Exactly.
At the end of turn or at the end of battle. And the biggest issue that Narukami has, so inherently, Grand Blue as a deck on paper should lose to Narukami's mechanic of binding things from the field and from the drop zone. But Bushiroad printed a card for Zorga. It's specifically built for the way Zorga plays. Sleeve Tugging Bell, which says, when placed on rearguard circle, you take your entire bind zone and place all cards from it into your drop zone, and it gets +5 for each.
That should have said all orders.
Something to that effect.
Yes.
But in standard and D standard, the way that it's designed, you're generally going to get 10 to 15k worth of power because you're going to bind 3 orders and then play it, put those orders back so you can reuse them for Alchemagic. What it does in Premium is you play it as a one of because
Greed Shade
and Columbard and Obadiah, Big Obadiah, are able to mill the card out of your deck on demand, or in Greed Shade's case, randomly. You'll mill it. You'll then use Greed Shade to then add it back to hand. So that way, once your opponent starts stun-versing your drop zone and getting rid of it, you can now call her out, get your entire drop zone back, and all cards that were lost during Stunverse, and
It'll get huge.
She'll get huge.
But that's not the point, because most people get rid of it right after it gets huge.
Yes.
They will then use Greed Shade, because they will probably call out Columbard or with Beatrice from the drop, activated skill, put it into there. Then call over it with Greed Shade, and then use Greed Shade skill to bounce it back into their hand.
Yes.
Which is honestly very annoying.
For an Narukami player, yes.
Yes. So you can hear my strife against it.
Yes.
Now, what I do like about Extermination Dragon, and what brings out probably like the best part about Narukami here, is if they leave their field empty, which will most likely be the case because they don't want to be stun burst.
Correct.
My front row is still gaining power for that turn.
Yes.
I do not need Vowing Sword for that cost. I can ride into another Vowing Sword just to get 2 binds out.
Yes.
I have a lot of movement that I can do past this. Now, what I think it also helps with was the issue where even though I did bind the field, I did bind 4 cards.
Yes.
They still hit trigger units, which made Vowing Sword useless.
Yes.
Because I'm unable to give 10k to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Example is Cho-O.
Yes.
My situation, Dragonic Descendant Sigma, right? These restanding units are not gaining power.
Nope.
And I do think Extermination Dragon just clears up that issue.
Yes.
You're able to give the front row that unit's power, or for every empty rearguard circle, they get +10. So they had 2, which is going to be the common case.
+20.
+20. So I'm going to be having a 34k attacking Cho-O on an Excel circle.
Yep.
Or a 29 on a regular rearguard. Or a 31 Sigma on a regular rearguard.
Yes.
Decent numbers. I can't complain.
Those are some pretty good numbers.
That's all I asked for.
And even considering the deck that neither of us play, Vanquisher.
You can go back. Yeah, thank you for bringing back Vanquisher. You can, after following with this turn and giving 20k to the board, it is not a continuous effect. It is an auto effect or an act effect, which means whoever got the power stays with that power. Yes. It won't leave. You can proceed to bind cards in your hand, call them out. They won't gain power for that skill, but you can bind your Vanquisher
full
Bronto, and then spend the cost to ride full Bronto over the Vanguard, pretty much getting another attack in.
Yes.
And you could do this with Eradicators, but I do not recommend it because you would have to be running Sweep Command, right?
And Sweep Command's unfortunately not that great due to not having an Excel marker and being an 11k.
And you also would need a rear guard to bind on your opponent's side, which good luck if you can.
Yeah.
So overall, Extermination Dragon is by far, I think, a good secondary, and there is space for it in the Narukami deck. Now, I am going to mention that Narukami is a deck that keeps reappearing sometimes.
Yes.
And it is also good to mention, it is not because of its strides, other than Stunverse.
Stunverse is very good.
Yes. None of the other strides had enough impact to be considered good because it's always struggling because we were forced into the requirement of a third resource called Thunderstrike.
Yes.
Now it's looking like they are picking up. Sadly enough, we did not get 2 good premium collection cards. We only got 1.
Yes. There is another good stride for Narukami. It is unfortunately, however, GB8. Closure Dragon.
Closure Dragon is a superb stride.
Correct.
If you guys need to know and you guys are not sure, it takes both your field and your opponent's field. They both go into the drop zone, and then your opponent grabs their whole drop zone and puts it into their bind zone. And then continuous, all cards on your side of the field gain plus 2k for every card in your opponent's bind zone. So if they have you, say you're fighting Grand Blue, you bound 40 cards. Okay, all your rear guards that you call out after striding into him get plus 80k.
Correct. And he doesn't sit there and say all of your current units get plus 20 or plus 2k. He says he gives himself the effect.
Continuous.
They all get plus 2, which includes back row rear guards, front row rear guards, Excel rear guards. All of your rear guards get plus 2.
Yep. And only issue with that, like I said, is, or like he said, was that it's a GBA. Now, good workarounds, not many. We're not Gear Chronicle. We're not Nova Grapplers. We can't get 8 cards face up by second strike.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to work towards it or hope that you saw a lot of your heal triggers early and maybe go into it. Other than that, there is VMAX that does require Thunderstrike 5. So if it's a deck like Stoicheia or any of the Stoicheia nations or clans that have Sleep Tugging Bell, you may not be able to go to it, but it is one of the few cards that allow you to damage your opponent past 5 damage.
Yes, it is one of the very rare cards that actually does that extra damage. DP actually having one of the others.
Yes.
But yeah, this makes the deck, it shores up some of the deck's issues with not being able to have another first stride outside of Stunverse that is good. Currently, what the deck would do is it would either go into V-Buster or Voltage, Draconic Vanquisher, V-Buster, or Draconic Vanquisher, Voltage. Stride into one of those. V-Buster would say Soul Blast 1, turn up another copy, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it, and choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire and bind it, then choose one of your opponent's cards and drop and bind it. That was it. You got 2 cards out of it and to bind. Then there was Voltage that said if it hit, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it, then choose 3 of your opponent's units in the drop zone, bind them. Those were our only 2 alternative strides if there wasn't enough to make Stunverse viable to go into that turn. Now we have the ability to where if they're sitting there, they're playing the game where they don't have a bunch of cards on board, they're playing the game where they didn't guard with a bunch of cards. They've instead decided to eat the damage. We can now go into Extermination Dragon, draw more cards, give our front row power, and we get to punish our opponent for not playing our game, which is call cards down, put cards in drop. I'm going to take them.
Yes. I'm going to take them. So that coming in, we've gone through a few of the premium decks. We're skipping Shadows, Grey Nature, and Dark Irregulars for the time being. We'll talk about a few of them tomorrow, Friday, with Matt Rivers and Richard Garcia, who will be coming in. Richard Garcia, like I said again, is the owner of Kingslayer Cards. Coming to a close today, what?
We do have one more card that we still have to cover, and it is the G-Guard.
You're right. How did I forget the G-Guard?
We also forgot the Spike Brothers G-Guard, so we should go back and hit that one real quick.
Hit the Spike Brothers one really quick.
Yes. It's not too important to Spike Brothers. For the most part, their G-Guards are just setup fodder from what I remember. They're actually Flip G-Guard is actually one of their better G-Guards, and it helps put them towards the Crazy 8 effect. But we'll go ahead and go into that G-Guard just real quick. Just that way we made sure we had all of our bases covered.
You don't remember?
No.
Okay.
This is the one that I don't remember.
That's fine. Understandable. How could you not remember?
Oh, it's not like I haven't listed every card off of memory so far.
I do believe that you're a very good encyclopedia. So the card is... Gotta read this here. Dowager Empress. Villainous. Dowager Empress. Villainous. Fade? Evade?
So let's see. Dowager Empress, Villainous Evita. G-Guard, when placed on Guardian Circle, Counterblast 1, choose 3 normal units from your drop zone, and this unit gets combined shield of all of those cards. Then if you chose one or more grade 3s, you draw a card, then all the chosen cards are put on the bottom of your deck in any order. This is very good for... They don't really run it that much anymore, but V Juggernaut Maximum and V Treasured Black Panther, because those cards put themselves into soul to call another copy out of deck. So this now lets you recycle those cards to use their effects again. But it also, if you're in a pinch, you can sit there and choose, say, 3 grade 1s. It now gets plus 30k shield. It's a 45k shield. If you need that extra draw, you can sit there and choose 2 grade 1s and a grade 3. You now get to draw a card, and then you put all those cards on the bottom of your deck, and it's now a 35k shield. So this isn't so much setup as it is recovery, which is something that any deck always enjoys, is a good recovery card that is well tempoed with how the deck wants to function.
Yes.
So
in terms of Spike Brothers, it's a recovery.
It's a good G-Guard.
Yeah. So coming into the second G-Guard that we did forget to mention was the Narukami one that I think I pulled up on my phone here. And
I know it's Sky Guardian Supreme Dragon.
Yeah, this one didn't list the name, but I will read the skill out. Auto, when this unit's put on Guardian Circle, your opponent chooses up to 2 of their rear guards. The sad up to.
Yep, they get to choose.
But following that, if they did not choose...
they did not choose 2.
If they did not choose 2, it gains additional plus 10k shield. If they did not choose 1 or less...
If they did not choose 1.
If they did not choose 1, it also gets another plus 10k shield. So max 35k shield.
Which is actually pretty good for the deck. Currently, our biggest G-Guard is Bulwark Dragon, which gets to a maximum of 25k shield.
And the same for the Noble that also gets 25 shield if you bind something in your drop zone.
Yes.
2 cards from your drop zone.
Yes. Bulwark is good in the fact that it can retire rested units for every 4 cards in your opponent's bind. This card, however, gives your opponent the choice. This is, again, the same thing with the Mega Colony. It's not that great, but it gives because the fact that it namely gives your opponent a choice, but the two choices that they have to make are both beneficial to you. Either A, you're getting a lot of shield that they're not going to be able to deal with, or B, they're getting rid of one of this card specifically takes away front row rear guards.
Yes.
They can't choose back row. So unless they're playing an Excel deck and they have an expansive front row, even then they're more than likely not going to be willing to give up pieces.
Unless it's after they attack.
Yes. So they're always going to give you that shield. But is that shield worth it instead of just saying on place, bind 2 front row rear guards? Because that's one of the other issues with Narukami in comparison to, like, say, Kagero, is Kagero gets a targeted removal card on the opponent's turn. Narukami can do that.
They have to work for it.
They have to jump through a few
And
hoops.
that's what Eradicators does best for the most part. They have the Interceptor Unruly Dragon that requires the Eradicator Counterblast.
And
So-
Eradicator Vanguard.
Yes, which I hope is the case if you're playing Eradicators. But you don't always get that Counterblast. And you could try to run as many Eradicators as you want. The only issue is that you still have 16 cards in the deck, or maybe 14 cards or 13 cards that are not Eradicator that end up in that damage zone, which are your triggers for the most part. Past that, it's a phenomenal card. Intercept, Counterblast 1, retire one of your opponent's front row rear guards. That is not the attacking or boosting, but I don't know how you would boost on front row. I don't know why I put that part in there.
Well, it doesn't choose front row. It just says choose one of your opponent's rear guards. Counterblast 1, when you intercept, choose an opponent's rear guard that isn't attacking or boosting and retire it.
Yes.
It deals with, like, V command or original Commander Laurel is what comes to mind. Blaster Friend Barkgull, Floral Paladin Flogel. Things that, like, if your opponent's on a different spot of their attack, you can get rid of in order to avoid issues with it.
And then following that, you have two-story
Eradicator,
Konoha,
Cohen Shock.
Kohenchak, which says both you and your opponent choose a rear guard and retire it.
When a rear guard of your opponent's is retired by one of your card effects.
Yes.
So it's another your opponent chooses, and you're also retiring something as well. But it is once per turn, not a hard once per turn. So if you have multiple Cohen Shocks, they stack.
Yes.
But you are getting the effect to where you sit there and you're like, all right, intercept with Unruly, Counterblast 1, retire this unit over here. Cohen Shock trigger, choose one of your rear guards, retire it. Now, if they're finally down to that last rear guard, we can move into Narukami's best G guard, Impede Dragon, which is
turn a card from your G zone face up. Your opponent chooses one of their rear guards, retire, binds it. Then, if your opponent has 2 more rear guards than you, they have to retire another one. But the second one is a regular retire.
yes.
Now, this is a lot more plausible because you just retired or killed most of your field with Cohen Shock.
Yes.
Honestly, for the most part, you're right. We don't have a lot of choice retires. Unruly would have to be our only one. And then we have to work towards making our opponent choose the rear guard that we want them to retire.
Yes.
Which, at the end of the day, was it worth it?
Yes. And so it would have been nice to sit there and see essentially a Denial Griffin for Narukami. Asking to bind 2 things in the front row would have been a bit much.
Yes.
Because that stops every single non-Excel deck from having a front row. And even most Excel decks, it stops up a lot of their attacks. Because if you're able to G-Guard twice, that's almost every single Excel deck's entire front row.
Yep.
So we got a good defensive G-Guard. We just didn't get the type of G-Guard that it may be asking for too much. But it would have been really nice to sit there and see a G-Guard that gave Narukami that targeted removal.
So I do think we went overtime. We're like 2 hours in. Let's kind of close it off here. So we went through a good chunk of the reveals today, or the reveals these last 2 weeks. We missed Grey Nature, Shadow Paladins, and Dark Irregulars, which we will cover probably on Friday. I do know that Shadow Paladins is another deck that Richard does love, so we'll kind of get into that discussion there. Overall, the meta does look like it's shifting.
Yes.
But doesn't look one-sided
Not
like
yet.
before. But that could be all an interpretation.
Chicago will definitely give us some good information on what the meta has shaped up to now
Before premium selection, because none of those
Yes.
cards will be legal until after June.
prior to premium selection, we're going to get a good look into what the current Western meta looks like with Order Colony, with Nightmare Dolls, and the rest of the meta that is currently in place, Eradicators to a certain extent, Thavas to a certain extent. All of these decks are going to move around, and we're going to see an update to the meta, even though we've seen so few like new releases. But I think we've said for the most part our pieces on the meta. There will probably be some more information to come out of, like Frankie said, Matt Rivers and Richard Garcia this Friday. I won't be here for that podcast, unfortunately, but I'm hopefully going to be back for some future ones.
Yep, of course. So Anderson Williams, I think we said it earlier, is part of Team Eclipse, a team that I'm currently running with a few of them back in my local area, and we're kind of like trying to get ourselves to be a little bit more competitive, taking us out to events sooner or later. We were supposed to do some Spring Fest, but
Traveling is a bit hard right now.
traveling's a bit hard, and a lot of us switch jobs, so it's kind of difficult right now.
Yeah.
But we will see what we can do later down the line. Overall, where we going to do a few other of the Team Eclipse members throughout each podcast, so you guys get to know them. I'll always be here because, you know, it's podcast being run by the Dojo of Naru Samurai. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming by today. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Do check out Twitter as well. But thank you so much. Let me know how the podcast went. I'm going to make a post on Twitter about the podcast, your thoughts. Did it run too long? Should it become shorter? Any information like that will be great. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for coming by, and we'll see you next time.
Hopefully to see you at Spring Fest.
Exactly. But we'll see you next time in the dojo.
Thanks for watching The Dojo. If you would like to see more card fight content like this, make sure to catch The Dojo and Naru Samurai on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Spotify, and Apple Podcast.